The accident that sets the plot in motion began with a relic that once belonged to the protagonist's mother. When it fell to the ground, the artifact shattered, sending shards of glass flying everywhere, and painful memories surged in the poor girl's mind like boiling water in a kettle. In these memories, a man named Yoon Ji-yul firmly declared that the young woman would regret something we still don't know at this point. Suddenly, when she opened her terrified eyes, the young maiden found herself in a strangely modernized environment. She, dressed in her medieval attire amidst Shine's casual looks, panicked as a car zoomed past her. An old woman offered help to the frightened girl standing on the sidewalk, but the young woman refused any assistance, even though she was in a universe where she had no clue what anything around her meant. Furthermore, when she caught a glimpse of her reflection in a shop window, the woman was someone entirely different, her long, straight brown hair replacing her usual blonde curls. However, the schizoid trip didn't last more than a blink, as the maiden was soon thrust back into her original world, where the maids around her were calling her by the name Lady Elodie and begging for forgiveness for something they supposedly did. Hearing her name repeated over and over, Elodie's memories slowly began to return, and soon enough, she started sweating as she recalled that somehow, it was the end. These were memories of her past life. Her name is Elodie Purdia, a typical noblewoman from the medieval Western world, though one fact sets her apart from other women of her social standing. Elodie is the illegitimate daughter of Duke Purdia. In other words, her father had ventured into the wrong cave and brought to life this beautiful, blessed figure with crimson eyes. Until then, Elodie had never experienced such strange and vivid visions. But when her mother's relic fell and shattered, she was immediately hurled into a distant memory from a past life. Unless, of course, she was merely assuming it was another life, for aside from the basic answer of 1 + 1, certainty no longer existed in anything at all. However, a vague recollection in her mind reminded her of a phase in her previous life, when she had read a novel called The Adopted Daughter of the Villainous Family Becomes Beloved. Apparently, she was embodying the character from that tale, which might have been great, except for the fact that the blonde was an impulsive brat who constantly messed up everyone's lives for her own satisfaction. Maybe because of that, or maybe not, Elodie Purdia ended up dying young. Now, trapped in the skin of this insufferable lady, the woman realized she was doomed. As memories from both her past life and this medieval noble existence began to flood back, along with all the trouble she had caused the poor maids of her luxurious mansion and the grotesque flaunting of wealth in a Sasha Meneghel style from the Middle Ages, Elodie knew she needed to find a way to redeem herself before someone sought vengeance and put her 6 feet under. However, setting things straight, she remembered she wasn't killed for being obnoxious, but because of her father, Duke Purdia, the most ruthless villain in the world. Being a cold-hearted scoundrel, he didn't even care about his daughter's death, according to the novel, since the true heroine of this story was Estelle Purdia, who had been adopted for political reasons. Yet, thanks to her stunning beauty, Estelle charmed the family, earning the green pass to everyone's heart, and ultimately ended up happily married. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a romantic fantasy story with a healing fiction genre, whatever that means. Elodie had become engaged to the first prince, but due to her reputation as an unbearable pest, the engagement was cancelled. Her father was the head of the Purdia ducal family, known for their cruelty. The duke had tried to strengthen his power by aligning with the first prince, so he adopted Estelle to be his trophy daughter, a charming girl with the right looks who could melt the heart of the young nobleman, thus securing a marriage between the two. Speaking of Duke Purdia, Elodie knew she needed to stay as far away as possible from this madman, but if she tried to run away, she'd surely be captured. So, she decided to leave the house and live an independent life before Estelle's adoption turned everything upside down. Of course, the family wouldn't take that lightly, but Elodie would have to do whatever she could. Her first step was to end her engagement to that silver-haired, green-eyed heartthrob. Elodie would have loved to live alongside that pretty face, but she figured not being killed was more important. So she wrote a letter addressed to the first prince. Without delay, the message reached the hands of Ademir Prezelwallen, affectionately called Ademir by all. He thought his beloved was sending a note about the emperor's birthday banquet they were planning. But reality hit him like a nail-studded club as he read those painful words requesting the end of their engagement. Unsure of how to react, Ademir thought someone was messing with him. Also, without delay, Elodie was summoned to face the one person she most wanted to avoid, Duke Purdia. His first words were, "There's a problem." Those words echoed like pins through the maiden's mind, her clenched backside locking up tighter than a Wi-Fi signal in a cave. Her mind raced, thinking of all the potential scoldings her father might unleash. Whether it was about something foolish she had done with the maids, or because she had sold the golden dinner set to buy skins in League of Legends. Then, Sylvester Perdue broke the silence, mentioning the breakup letter Elodie had sent, as the first prince had come to him, whining like Kiko to Dona Florinda. Sylvester always covered up for his daughter's missteps, but this time it was different because Elodie had wanted this engagement in the first place. She had thought it would be okay since her father had opposed the marriage before, but he made it clear that things had changed. In Elodie's mind, this was an engagement neither the first prince nor the duke wanted, so it would be easy to break it off. However, her father informed her that she would be put on a probationary period, just like in the Brazilian labor law, to see if marrying her to Ademir was worth it or not. Setting that aside, Elodie asked if he had anything else to say, but Sylvester dismissed her, telling her to reflect on her actions. With that, she excused herself and left the duke's office. As she stepped out of the room, Elodie let out the tension that had been running up her spine the entire conversation, but at least she had gotten off with a much lighter punishment than she had expected. After all, she had been the one to push for this marriage in the first place. In any case, now that her father had decided to continue with the engagement, it meant the duke supported the prince, which was the double-edged sword Elodie didn't want. Still, she had 3 years before Estelle was adopted, giving her time not to act too hastily. It was good she thought of that after trying to end her engagement just 20 minutes into this world. Regardless, she needed to be able to live independently, no matter the cost. However, this desire soon became a challenge as the world she now inhabited, in a distant past, had once been brought to the brink of total devastation by beings known as the 7 Deadly Sins. Serving the underworld goddess Irkalla, who coveted both heaven and earth, the 7 sins brought death and destruction across the continent at her command. Then, as the entire world fell to its knees before this malevolent figure, Ishtar, the younger sister of Irkalla and the goddess of heaven and earth, descended to save it. Ishtar chose 7 mortals and bestowed upon them special powers with her blessing, so they could defeat and seal the 7 deadly sins. The heroes of Ishtar emerged victorious and were celebrated as saviors, and each one of them founded a noble house in their name. Thus, the legend of the foundation behind the Wallachia Empire was born. Today, only 5 of the 7 houses remain, including the Imperial House, and among them, the Perdue House is known as the guardian of the blessing of destruction. After that bit of backstory about the ceiling under which Elodie lives her plot, the girl was walking through the mansion's hallways when she ran into 2 people she had been expecting to bump into eventually, Yancey and Carl, her brothers. The taller one was the firstborn of the Duke and heir to the Perdue House, while Carlet was the second. Yancey asked about the engagement breakup, a fact Elodie confirmed with a big smile. Carl, on the other hand, suggested that she had been dumped by the prince, which infuriated the woman internally, though for some reason she responded by saying the boy wasn't wrong. The older brother wanted to know if their father had been too upset with her, but she happily reported that the man had gone easy on her with a punishment of staring at the wall for half an hour. Calling his sister affectionately by her nickname Lily, the man was relieved, having thought the Duke would tear her apart. Or perhaps not. As the direct heir to the Perdue lineage, Yancey bore a blessing running through his veins with only one purpose: obliteration. His power to erase the existence of things certainly frightened their enemies, but the greatest danger he posed was in his character. Despite his outward appearance of being a calm and good-natured man, Yancey Perdue hid behind that mask a cold and manipulative heart, with the sole aim of trampling over anyone who got in his way, as long as it benefited him. In other words, the man was the devil in disguise. Lily tried to resist his good guy charm, while Carl suggested his sister see a psychologist to fix her scrambled head. Furious, Elodie threatened to smack her brother with her own fist until Yancey reprimanded the younger sibling, reminding him that they should all honor their bloodline and care for their family, though Carl made sure to point out that Lily wasn't exactly blood of our blood. Glancing sideways at Lily, Yancey replied that Ishtar had not only given him one brother, but 2 beloved little ones to complete the family. Trying to maintain her role as the good sister, Lily froze inside at the coldness that exuded from the man's words, which were as fake as a $3 bill. So, to escape the situation, she excused herself, saying she needed to retreat to the annex. As she left, Carl commented that he almost threw up the steak and fries from lunch because his sister was acting even weirder than usual, an opinion his older brother agreed with, though he didn't know why exactly. As children, both brothers had manifested their blessings from Ishtar, passed down to all direct descendants of Valentia's founding houses, except for Elodie. Not having received any power, the logical explanation was that Perdia's blood didn't run through the veins of the adopted daughter. And although she was publicly known as the Duke's illegitimate daughter, she wasn't even that. Not a drop of pure lineage flowed in this hatchling. And Elodie knew very well that she needed to gain her independence before this secret was exposed, because if the truth came out, things would definitely heat up. Perhaps due to the immense pressure she was feeling, thinking there had to be a silver lining to this whole mess, the girl let out a little chuckle while standing alone in a corner of the garden, making the maids think she had a screw loose. In her frantic little mind, Lily wouldn't have known this without recovering her past life memories, but now she understood that one day she would receive the blessing from her biological parents. And it wasn't just any blessing. It was the blessing of purification, granted to the house of Duke Severus, a house that proudly bore the image of a stag on its crest. However, far from the heroic narrative this possibility could provide, the reality presented in the novel was of a young noblewoman who was discovered not to be a Perdia and thus condemned to become a memory. In every timeline, the wretched woman ended up dead for being the Duke's fake daughter. To top it off, Duke Richard Severus, her biological father, was in a deep coma with no signs of waking up. Without any backup from her father in this mess, all Elodie Severus could do was hide her blessing as best she could once it manifested, using it to secure her freedom before she was exposed. Amidst these reflections, Lily walked into the Perdia Duchess's stunning garden, which had more than just a few mortal dangers behind its beauty. Still, it was in this place that the maiden decided to start her bid for freedom. Just at the entrance to the garden, the young woman was greeted by Demis Perdia, wife of Duke Sylvester and biological mother to Yancy and Carlet. Above all, Demis was the greatest poison expert in all of Valentia. Elodie responded to the greeting and suggested they stroll together through the glass greenhouse while discussing a particularly interesting matter, all related to the excellent work that Duchess Demis did with her toxic concoctions. Accepting the girl's invitation, Demis warned beforehand that the greenhouse harbored dangerously dangerous dangers inside, and the girl shouldn't touch anything without permission. Lily, for her part, remained calm, as she had no intention of losing a finger before securing her independence. So, as they walked along the red carpet leading into the greenhouse, the Duchess asked what the conversation was about. Lily explained that she had heard a rumor about an order given by the Imperial Palace to the Duke's wife. She found it very unfair that common farmers had ordered the destruction of all the stock of insecticides that the woman had developed to help them with their work. Demis felt grateful for the sentiment, but concluded that there was no use crying over spilled milk. Besides, the regulatory authorities had already issued a warning. If Demis continued to sell substances toxic to human health, prison awaited her. And that's where Lily came in, according to her. Faced with Demis's blank stare, the young lady handed over a vial containing a yellow substance, generating even more confusion in the Duchess's mind. Elodie explained that the vial held the solution to the problem, an antidote called Antitoxin Colony, Elodie Perdia Edition. With this, Demis could apply an anti-agent to remove the harmful effects of the insecticide, while Lily could make some money to achieve her big goal, to become independent and leave the Perdia household as soon as possible. Initially skeptical, Demis asked if Elodie really believed what she was saying, as it seemed more like another one of her pranks. In response, Lily invited her to test the product, and if it didn't work, she would guarantee a refund. So, without further ado, Demis took the solution and asked the girl to come closer. When Lily did, Demis asked what she saw inside the vial. Lily was perplexed to see a wriggling worm, but Demis corrected her, saying it was a grub, the nasty little creature causing all the trouble. Not only did it tear through the soil, but it was as resistant as a cockroach and reproduced like a rabbit. With that, the Duchess wasted no time and poured poison into the container, suffocating the grub until it died dramatically. Then, she took Elodie's antidote and added it to see if the grub would come back to life under the influence of the insecticide. At that moment, Elodie felt her heart in her throat. Not because she doubted her product, but because watching it tested in front of her gave her a case of nerves, you know? So, she silently prayed for God to resurrect the worm, just like he had done with Jesus Christ. After all, like Jesus of Nazareth, humanity depended on this little worm, not to mention the small fortune Lily would make if everything went according to plan. She closed her eyes in reverence, and after a brief prayer, she opened them slowly, only to see the grub revive, stumbling around like her stepfather after arriving home on a Friday night when she was a kid. With that, Elodie celebrated, exclaiming that her antidote had worked wonders on that nasty poison. Since she had been the one to develop the insecticide, Demis gave her a hard stare, and Lily immediately turned her own embarrassed face away, trying not to catch a glimpse of her shame reflected in the Duchess's eyes. However, Demis wasn't actually angry, quite the opposite. She was impressed with what the girl had managed to create, whatever method she had used. In fact, she even commented that the girl had always been timid and fearful around her, but now things had changed. Still, the Duchess made it clear that such an antidote deserved a generous reward. Overjoyed, Elodie asked for one condition: that Demis sell the antidote in her own name, not in Elodie's. In exchange, she wanted to share the profits. Demis asked what kind of shady deal this was, hiding her name, and Lily explained that no one would ever believe she had developed the antidote. Moreover, she wasn't fond of drawing attention to herself, so she preferred to keep it low-key. In reality, this was the only way Elodie could disappear without a trace when the time came, but she couldn't even think of telling that to anyone, or she'd surely become a headline. So, Demis gave her a scrutinizing look to check if there was any catch in this deal, but eventually shrugged it off and agreed. After all, she had nothing to lose, except maybe her entire reputation if people found out she was falsely selling a product under her name when someone else had developed it. Now, she just needed to know one thing. How on earth had this girl created such a potion? Elodie explained that her blessing had manifested, and she now had the power to neutralize the harmful effects of poison. To be more precise, her blessing purified the poison rather than destroyed it. But Lily kept that little detail to herself. In the original novel, Elodie hatched a plan to poison Estelle, but in the end, she ended up drinking the poison herself and digging her own grave. However, her blessing prevented her from falling into that pit, allowing her to survive the ordeal. The biggest problem was that the revelation of her power had exposed to everyone that she wasn't a true Perdita. Demis, for her part, thought discovering the blessing was a reason to celebrate rather than keep it a secret. But Elodie made up an excuse, saying she didn't want to make the entire kingdom marvel at her talents and risk losing her cherished role as the subservient female in a cursed adoptive family. With that, Demis didn't need to worry, as Lily would do everything she could to maintain her anonymity and, consequently, the life of her dreams as a legitimate, original, and true daughter of the Duke of Perdita. With that, Demis agreed and dropped the matter, realizing it was the least she could do for her new business partner. However, the next day, Elodie woke up looking paler than a palm tree left in the sun for 13 days. One of the maids noticed how terrible she looked and commented that the poor girl was in worse shape than her Kala after visiting Madame Demis. With a voice as hoarse as a chain-smoking ant, Lily weakly called out to her maid, Martha, but didn't have the strength to continue speaking. Martha, tearfully scolding her mistress, lamented that she couldn't wander around that venomous death trap of a greenhouse, or her skin would end up looking like a rough plastered wall, and the only thing she was good for was being pretty. Moreover, Martha expressed concern for her mistress's health, because if she kicked the bucket, who would pay her salary? Elodie retorted that if Martha weren't the daughter of her former nanny, she would have fired the girl ages ago. And in case the maid was also worried about the madam, Lily made it clear that Demis was still as young and beautiful as ever. Martha didn't doubt that for a second, as the woman never seemed to age, to the point where she could be mistaken for Lily's sister. With that said, the noblewoman rose from her bed as if she had been resurrected, and her maid took the opportunity to inform her that a guest was waiting for her. Puzzled, Lily hadn't expected anyone to want to see her for any reason, something with which Martha, as her best friend, had to agree. Regardless, the guest couldn't wait, so Elodie had to pick up the pace. After all, they were talking about none other than His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince of Valencia. Upon hearing that, Elodie descended the stairs with the grace of an elephant under attack by a gang of hippos. Approaching the visitor, she apologized for keeping him waiting. The prince didn't seem to mind the madness of the young lady and asked her to join him for a conversation. But before the conversation could begin, Lily reiterated that her request to annul the engagement was legitimate. Then, after biting, she attempted to soothe the wound by apologizing for forcing the gentleman into marrying her, though she reminded him that he had initially refused. However, the man didn't take kindly to this slap of facts to his face, his brow darkening with fury, as he criticized the selfishness of the young lady, suggesting that her behavior wasn't befitting of Elodie Perdita. As far as he was concerned, it was more likely that Lily was possessed than that she was deliberately throwing the marriage down the drain. Keeping up her polite facade, she swallowed her anger and acted as if the prince had made some sort of joke, but he didn't believe everything was fine, as her skin looked like styrofoam insulation from a construction site, which he made sure to point out. Despite feeling offended by everyone's comments on her poor skin condition, the girl couldn't express her frustration, as that would go against the etiquette expected of her. Furthermore, she brought up that her father was also opposed to the annulment of the marriage, and since she depended on those guys for everything, Elodie asked the prince to say something sensible to change the duke's mind, as he never listened to her. Before responding, Adamir wanted to know why she had requested the annulment out of the blue, so Elodie paused for a moment to take a breath and said she had fallen in love. The prince's perplexed expression remained unchanged as Lily added that, while it was difficult to admit, it would be dishonorable for her to marry a cucumber while thinking of a sweet potato. For this reason, she was convinced the annulment was the best course of action. However, rather than making the prince back down, her words only enraged him further, as he declared that he wouldn't back down from his promise so easily. The man simply couldn't accept the fact that his fiancée had fallen for another man, especially considering how she had once coveted the title of crown princess above all else. Once, she had even pretended that her affection for him was genuine. But now Adamir could see the wolf hiding behind the sheep's wool, the deceptive female standing right before him. Lily tried to say something to the young man, but he was lost in his dark thoughts, certain that her abrupt change in behavior was far too suspicious. With that, he concluded there was a hidden agenda and reiterated that he wouldn't break off the engagement out of spite. According to him, Elodie was throwing a tantrum to get his attention, and he would only agree to the annulment if they discussed the matter properly at a later time, not in the speed run of her erratic mind. Speaking of erratic, as she listened to his words, the girl was mentally dancing in circles, her complexion growing even paler than a Norwegian vampire. Putting that topic aside, Adamir suggested they discuss the preparations for his father's birthday banquet online through Google Meet, with the camera turned off, as he didn't want to look at the face of this ungrateful woman. In the midst of this conversation, the girl was already more gone than present. Although the prince thought she was faking weakness to elicit sympathy, the poor thing collapsed to the floor right there. Still, the man assumed it was all a ruse, and he almost kicked her to prove his point. But she wasn't responding to any of his calls. Getting closer and insisting on calling her name, he finally realized she was truly out of it, so he lifted her in his arms and shouted for help. Yet all he heard was the sound of silence, ignoring his panic calls, forcing him to lay her back down on the floor. Although Elodie was just the Duke's illegitimate daughter, it was cruel that no maid was there to offer assistance in such a dire moment. Even a man as selfish as Adamir could recognize that. Soon, with the Duke's daughter in his arms, Adamir set out in search of a guest room where he could lay her down, only to run into Martha, the maid who had always been by Elodie's side. With the servant's help, the prince finally carried his ex-future fiancée to a bed, and Martha casually remarked that this wasn't the first time the girl had blue-screened like this. Adamir was outraged to hear the maid speak so nonchalantly about her mistress's condition. At the same time, he examined Elodie and noticed a cut on one of her wrists. Reflecting on the grim reality, Elodie was confined to a guest bed with barely any servants to care for her, where her only companion was a psycho maid who seemed like one of those movie servants who kept their masters sick for sheer pleasure. Lastly, there was this cut on her wrist, which didn't seem like a good sign, though Adamir believed Elodie wasn't in mortal danger. Since earlier, during their conversation, the girl had been sweating, but Adamir had assumed she was just nervous in the presence of his imposing, gallant self. Now that he realized the girl had truly been in bad shape, the prince felt ashamed for having downplayed the condition of the one who should have been his future wife. Speaking of which, this event made him recognize that he hardly knew his betrothed, despite his arrogance making him believe everything he did was enough. Sometime later, Elodie awoke with a pounding headache, convinced that she had crashed due to the toxins left in her body from preparing the antidote. After all, when her blessing had manifested, Ellery discovered there were certain conditions for the effects of her power to be triggered. First of all, she had to ingest the poison and then apply her blessing to any ordinary water, creating a counteragent. Additionally, Lily had learned that if she was pressed for time, she could use her own blood instead. Actually, she had only intended to open a small cut to collect the blood, but her hand had slipped. Speaking of which, she didn't remember changing the bandages on her wrist, so she figured the doctor must have come while she was passed out, but then she recalled that the jerk had refused to treat children born out of wedlock, the moralistic scumbag. At that moment, Martha arrived with a teapot of hot water. Quite simply the worst thing on the face of the earth. If this maid wasn't trying to kill her mistress, I don't know what is. Additionally, she had brought powdered medicine instead of pills, just to add that delightful touch to the boiling water. As she took her medication, Elodie asked where Adamir had gone, and Martha replied that the crown prince had left as soon as the doctor had arrived. Not that Lily cared much, but she figured it must have looked bad to collapse right in front of her fiancé. By the way, the maid handed her a letter that the handsome prince had left for her to read upon waking, in which Adamir expressed his desire to have her company at his father's birthday banquet. Upon reading that, the sparkle in Lily's eyes quickly faded. Not even in her wettest nightmares had she imagined that, after requesting the annulment of their marriage, her fiancé would invite her to a bloody ball. To top it all off, she hadn't even thought about a dress for the occasion, since her plan had been to dump that clingy Adamir. However, Martha took charge, confidently stating that everything was under control, though her mistress didn't seem too pleased, as the banquet was the least of her worries. Elodie simply couldn't understand why the stubborn prince wouldn't accept being dumped, so Martha speculated that perhaps the man had finally fallen for her. With her self-esteem still intact, Elodie sternly told her maid never to say something so absurd in her presence again, as there was no way the crown prince could be interested in a bastard who was more trouble than a used washing machine. Regardless of whether there was an answer to that question or not, Elodie remained motivated to take things slow. After all, she still had 3 years before the Duke adopted Estelle. By then, Elodie would have made enough money and could flaunt her independence without risking death. Or at least, that's what she thought. A few days later, in the mansion's lobby, Elodie stumbled upon yet another challenge in her hectic life. Though she didn't recognize the young man at first, she stared into his face and recalled a passage from the novel where a character had the same exact features as the guy: a thick neck and a head shaped like a croquette. He was Hector Arnold, the trusted advisor of Duke Perdua. In other words, the Duke's well-trained lapdog. However, this man would be the one responsible for stabbing Sylvester in the back without being caught, so perhaps this dog was more of a cat. But the worst part was that he would also play a crucial role in revealing the secrets of Elodie's lineage.